Welcome to Dominate Your Day podcast. This is the podcast that adds value to leaders who want to make a difference in the workplace. We believe each person is unique and has a purpose they can live out every day and make an impact in the world. Here at Dominate Your Day podcast, we hear stories from leaders who have used their unique talents to transform themselves and their companies from the inside out.
Welcome to our podcast, Dominate Your Day. We have a very special guest joining us. His name's Bob Tiede, and Bob is an accomplished leadership expert with truly a unique perspective. What I'm going to let him tell you about it. He also has written several books, and one of his most recent books, it was launched this last April 2023, is Leading with Questions, and he explores the power of inquiry and driving team performance and engagement. So I'm thrilled to have you here with us today, Bob, and I'd like you to join me in welcoming Bob to our show. So welcome, Bob.
Dana, pleasure to be with you today.
I'm so excited to have you here. So I think you're one of the few people I know that's been in worked for the same group for, was it 52 years? Is it 52 years?
52 years.
There's a lot of wisdom there.
Well, as I say, your friend Bob has no ability, obviously, to get a new job. I've been here for 52 years. My wife and I have been on the staff of Cru, formerly known as Campus Crusade for Christ, for 52 years. We joined in 1971, the year we graduated from the University of South Dakota. Our first assignment was Denver University, and then the next 2 years was Colorado School of Mines and Technology in Golden, Colorado. And then we were off to Ellensburg, Washington, Central Washington University for 3 years. And then in 77, I was asked to become the area ops director for the Cru ministry in the Northwest, the whole Northwest region, Washington, Oregon, Northern Idaho, and Alaska. And then in 79, the national director of Cru at that time played matchmaker and brought Josh McDowell and myself together. And that's what moved us to Dallas, where the Josh McDowell ministry was headquartered, a division of Cru. And for the next 24 years, had the privilege of working with Josh McDowell. The doors to Russia opened, led 18 major mission trips to Russia, taking 300 to 400 volunteers at a time. In 2004, we stepped away from that role. We took a sabbatical, and as we came back, Cru brought us 7 opportunities, but the one that resonated was leadership development. And so we've been on the U.S. leadership development team since 2005 and continue to have the time of our life.
That's it's so amazing that you not only have gotten to be with this organization for so long, but you've also got to have your wife with you as part of what the whole mission and what you're doing. I think if you could say, Bob, the legacy that you're leaving is huge for your generations to come, for your family. And you've got 4 kids and very active grandfather. So what I think is so interesting, besides your amazing personal journey with your wife, is how you got into leadership development. So why leadership development, and tell us about why, how you got involved in that.
Well, it's something that's true not just of our organization, it's actually true of any organization, company, church, for-profit, nonprofit, and that is in 15 to 20 years, almost none of the current leaders in any organization will still be leading. In their places will be the leaders they're now developing. And if they are not developing that next generation of leaders, that organization is not going to fail tomorrow, next week, next month, or next year. But it may fail 15 to 20 years from now. And history is actually filled with stories of organizations that were once, incredible. And 20 years later, they may not even exist, or they're a shell of themselves. And when you dig around, the reasons are complex, but almost always one of the reasons is those who were leading must have thought they would live forever because they made no preparation to pass on leadership to develop that next generation. And so, as stewards of what's been entrusted to us, or in any company, what's been entrusted to the leaders, it's incumbent that you are developing that next generation so that you can pass the baton. And so, in fact, that next generation will actually take that organization higher and serve more
Wow.
and be even more successful. As they will stand on the shoulders, but when you stand on the shoulders, you get to be higher.
That's true. And I think, Bob, you're reminding me, I was at coffee this morning with a friend who's in leadership. And and then yesterday I ran into a friend just on at a shopping center on the sidewalk I hadn't seen, that's also in leadership. And then I wrote about it this week. There is a challenge right now, and it has to in leadership, and it has to do with exactly what you're talking about. And that's the middle manager. So the middle manager, they both shared with me that their challenge is they have new middle managers and nobody has time to train them, to guide them. And they're stuck with hybrid. They're stuck with all the things going on right now
Yeah.
with trying to do more with less. And so as a leader, what is your advice for leaders today because we've got 5 generations in the workforce, right?
Yes.
And so
Well,
each of them needs something different. And so to your point, getting them ready for leadership. And some of them are there, but they don't have somebody guiding them because the
yeah.
other leaders are too busy. So what's your advice for that?
Well, I love quotes. And one of the quotes I'm thinking of is by Eisenhower, President Eisenhower. And it was that the urgent is seldom important and the important is seldom urgent. And
That's a good one.
let me just say that the important is developing that next generation of leaders. And as a leader, if you are in leadership, I think from time to time you have to step back and say, okay, what really is important here? I can spend all the time chasing the urgent, but the urgent is seldom important. But I need to focus on what's really important. And developing that next generation of leaders, it's like, well, if I don't do it today, again, nothing fails tomorrow.
Right.
But having something in place so that we can pass the baton 15 to 20 years from now. And then there's another advantage. One of my friends has written a book, and it's Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go is the title of the book. I was captured just by the title, but hear it again.
Yeah.
Help them grow or watch them go. That middle manager level you're talking about, if they're not being developed where they're at in the company, the organization they're currently a part of, don't be surprised if they leave you to go to a place that will be committed to their development. And so just understanding the urgency, the importance, I said the importance of developing that next generation, but also there's 2 other things. You will attract a higher quality of emerging leader when they know here's a place that's committed to developing me. And you'll retain that higher quality when you're committed to developing them. And so, for a leader who understands that, it's like we have no alternative except to develop that next group of leaders. Because when we do, we'll attract higher quality and we'll retain them. And in that process, we really will be developing that next generation. Of course, sometimes people say, you've heard this, well, what if we spend all this effort and develop them and they leave? And I say, well, what if you don't and they stay?
Yeah, then that's your problem. Yeah, right. So
Exactly.
I love that, Bob. I love that quote from Eisenhower and how I think because the leader is chasing after the urgent right now because everything's on fire, right? And it's like stop and wait. People are slow. We got to go slow with people and take time. So I appreciate that. So how did you get into leading with questions? Tell us that story. How did that happen and how are you using this now? And then now this book, the story of this book, Leading with Questions, that's out.
Well, Dana, whenever I speak, I start with a confession. And my confession, it's true. My confession is that for most of my career, I was a benevolent dictator. My
Mm,
only paradigm of leadership was the job of a leader was to tell staff what to do, to give them direction. I
mm,
grew up in a home where I was taught to say please and thank you. So, Dana, if you'd been on my team, I don't think I'd ever would have said, hey, Dana, go do this. It'd been more like, hey, Dana, this week we're working on this. It'd really be great if you could please do this.
mm-hmm.
And when you did it, I would have said, Dana, thank you. At a staff meeting, Dana, stand up. You all need to hear what Dana did. And I don't want to suggest that that was a total failure, but again, my only paradigm of leadership was the job of a leader was to tell staff what to do. And so if you wanted to be a leader, you had to be comfortable kindly telling staff what to do. Now, for me, that changed in 2006 when I found a book. I love books. I eat books for breakfast. And Dana, I find that, almost in every leadership book I've ever read, there's a morsel in there, something, a takeaway. You say, wow,
Mm-hmm.
that had a great perspective, a great lesson, a great thing to learn and apply. And my wife, Sherry, loves to go to bookstores. She goes all over the bookstore, but she always knows when she's done, she'll still find me in the leadership section.
Oh, that's
And my
great.
practice is to pull off 2, 3 books I've never seen before, peruse them to see if any of them are going home. Well, in 2006, I found this book. This literally is the book. It has all my notes. It has
Wow.
underlining,
Dog-eared.
everything. Dog-eared, yes. The first edition of Leading with Questions by Dr. Michael Marquardt. And I perused a few pages and said, this is going home. And it was a page turner for me. And it was filled with stories of leaders literally from around the globe, not just Americans, but leaders from around the globe who were leading with questions. And it shared the questions they used to lead. And as I read it, it was like, well, I had only one question. Why hasn't anyone ever shared this paradigm with me before? It was
Mm,
like it made instant sense. I saw that a leader who leads with questions would be so much more effective. And I was already on the leadership development team, so I began to teach out of it. And I put together an 8-session seminar on leading with questions, and it was well received. Well, fast forward a bit. In 2012, one of my crew colleagues had started a blog. And I saw her at our headquarters in Orlando. I said, Andrea, you've started a blog. She said, yes. And Bob, you need to start a blog. And I said, Andrea, why would I want to start a blog? And she said, well, let's sit down and I'll tell you. And so we sat down and and she said, Bob, I know you're 60 something and you probably know I'm 50 something. And our target audience, we were together on the leadership development team of emerging leaders, were average age is about 28. And she pointed this out and she said, Bob, a mistake that we can make is thinking we speak English, they speak English, we're good.
mm,
Well, that is helpful. If they all spoke Hungarian, we'd have to learn another language. But she then said, but Bob, they do speak another language. They speak the language of social media. And when they politely inquire, hey, Bob, are you on social media? Are you on LinkedIn, on Twitter, Instagram? And that 60 some leader said, no, 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 I'm never going to do that. She said, well, our staff are polite. I don't think they'll say anything, but I suspect they're walking away thinking, I hear old Bob did some good things in his day, but it's like he
mm,
no longer would be relevant. Well, somehow
mm.
that made sense to me. And sitting right there, I said, well, Andrea, what would I blog on? And she said, well, you'll have to decide that. I don't know. And I thought a little bit longer and thought, well, I don't want to do just another leadership blog. Not that that wouldn't be, or that would be bad, but there's so many great leadership blogs. And then this question came to me, was there a niche of leadership? And as soon as I had that question, it was like, well, of course, it would have something to do with leading with questions, that I've been doing. And so you go to the WordPress, which is one site to help you set up a blog. And Dana, the first question really asked is, what do you want your blog to be called? And so I had no idea, but I just on a lark, I typed in Leading with Questions, the name of the book. And as I did it, I thought, well, surely the author or the publisher will have tied it up, even if they're not using it. But it was available, and it was available, at $29 a year, whatever the cheapest price was. And
Mm-hmm.
so I grabbed it. But I must say, Dana, I was a little bit concerned. It's like, yes, I'd gotten it legally. I hadn't stolen it. But I was wondering, how would this guy, Michael Marquardt, feel that there was a blog out with the same title of his book? Because I didn't know Michael Marquardt. And so I blogged for about 2 months, wanting to get some content. And I worked on an email to Dr. Michael Marquardt, professor at George Washington University, sharing with him how his book had changed my leadership. I'd started this blog. Might I have permission to excerpt from his book? We'd make the book cover a featured image. We'd have a link to Amazon for purchase. I promised not to do anything without his permission. I hit send. I wondered, how will he respond? Within 24 hours, I had the most gracious email. I'd made his day. Bob, love your blog. Bob, you have carte blanche permission to excerpt from my book. I couldn't have asked for better. Well, a couple of years
Awesome.
later, he reached out to say, Bob, I'm doing a second edition. And Bob, would you be willing to be an endorser? And could I list Leading with Questions, your blog, as a recommended resource? It was like, well, of course. And then within a year, I had a trip to Washington, D.C., and had the privilege of actually sitting down with Mike for the first time. I say Mike, I was calling him Dr. Marquardt, and in that meeting, he said, Bob, it's Mike. Just call me
Call
Mike.
me Mike.
And so we became friends. And then, I don't know, 18, 20 months ago, Mike called again. We've had more conversations, but I remember this one. He said, Bob, it's time for a third edition. And I'm calling to ask, would you be willing to be the co-author? And I said,
Wow.
Mike, wow, yes, but Mike, you have a PhD. You're on the faculty of George Washington. Yes, I have a bachelor's, but I don't even have a master's. Are you sure? And he said, Bob, I'm absolutely sure. And he said, in the interest of full disclosure, he said a new edition needs about 25% new content. And he said, the truth is, you've already done all the work for the new content because at that point, the blog was 10 years old with more than 1,000 guest posts, or sorry, 1,000 posts and excerpts from books. And he said, Bob, everything we're going to need for the third edition sits on your blog. And so last summer of 2022, we spent about 6 weeks working together. And he's brilliant. He knew what he wanted to delete from the second edition, and I would then feed him. There's 10 chapters for each chapter from blog posts. I would feed him 10 times as much content as would be needed, and then
Mm.
he picked and chose and edited and determined what to input, and the result was the third edition of Leading with Questions. And such a gift to me to be the co-author with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Michael Marquardt. The book was released in April, and since then, for much of the time on Amazon, it has been the #1 bestseller in the category of business communication. And recently, Wiley Publishing, the publisher, has told us that it is in the top 10% of all business books being sold. So we're
That's
thrilled,
amazing.
yeah, with
Yeah.
the response. And I feel like, that story, I'm an unlikely co-author, having found the first edition.
But how cool that one of the things you did was you asked permission, you did it. The other thing I think you did as you listened to your coworker and created, you are in social media, you are relevant. I remember when I was in corporate, I followed your blog And I always thought it was great. And you said it's been out for 10 years, right?
Now
So
11.
11. So one of the things we talk about with coaches and with leaders who coach is asking questions. So let's get into the art of asking questions
Yes.
and tell us about why a leader who asks questions can be 10 times more effective. Talk to us about that.
Well, I will. Let me talk about it by asking you a couple of questions.
Yay.
And the first one's a silly question, but I'm going somewhere. So go with me on this one.
Okay.
Imagine that you're in a big rowboat with your team. We're going to say it's you and 9 others on your team. And there's oars for everyone. And you want to get that rowboat across the lake as quick as possible. How many of them would you like to have row with you?
Well, of course, all of them.
Exactly. I told you it was a silly question.
Yes.
But now imagine that same team, they're no longer in the rowboat, they're seated around your conference table. And there's an opportunity on the table. Now, listen carefully. If you're a leader like I used to be, the benevolent dictator, and you think it's your job to figure out how to take advantage of the opportunity and then to tell them what to do, how many mental oars are in the water figuring out what to do?
How many mental oars are in the water?
Right.
If I'm
Remember, you're the
telling
leader.
if I'm telling them what to do, they're not gonna mentally be engaged.
No, only one, only you is
Yeah,
trying to figure out how to take
that's right.
advantage of the opportunity. But if you're a
Right.
leader who leads with questions, and so you say to your team, hey, here's the opportunity we have. What do you all think we might do to take advantage? And you give eyeballs, to everyone around the table. What do you all think we might do to take advantage of this opportunity? Now, how many mental oars are in the water?
They're all in.
They're all in. And as
Yeah.
you hear all their ideas, now you're still the leader, but as you hear all their ideas, what is the probability that one or several of them might share ideas better than anything you'd thought of?
Well, I know they're going to come up with something better than I thought of, because one of the things we talk about with Clifton Strengths and from Gallup is that, you're not well-rounded by yourself, but you're well-rounded as a team. So as you
Yeah,
hear ideas from your team, it helps you broaden and expand your opportunities as opposed to just being one-minded
yeah.
about something. So I agree. Yeah.
And now imagine sitting across from you is Sarah, and Sarah shares an idea, and you think, wow, that is so much better than anything I was thinking. And so you say, Sarah, love your idea. In fact, Sarah, would you be willing to lead our whole team in executing that idea? How hard will Sarah work?
She will feel like she's valued and she's doing meaningful work, and she probably will be energized because she's doing what she created.
Yeah, implementing her idea.
Yeah.
And of course, as you said, probably will happen is more of a collaboration as they build on each idea. And and now the team owns the solution. There's ownership. And with that, they are going to execute as a team, generally speaking, far more energy, enthusiasm than if the benevolent dictator says, here's gang what we need to do. Here's what I want you to do. And they're thinking, several of them are thinking, I don't think that'll work. I don't think that's a great idea. But Dina signs our paycheck, so we better do what she
Hmm.
tells us to do if we want a job here. And then when it doesn't work, they say, I didn't think that would work. They're never all
Right.
in. Well, that is a simple illustration of how a leader who leads with questions, who asks, what do you all think we might do? And then listens, and then empowers staff to go with their thoughts. It takes some maturity. Sometimes we know the mountaintop where we want to go, the destination. And we also know our preferred route to get there. We have to give our staff freedom when they say, in other words, they know they're committed also to getting to that same destination, but their way to climb it may be a little bit different. And, the micromanager says, you got to go my route. But the
Hmm.
wise leader allows them the freedom to go a different route, knowing they're going to reach that destination, but they're going up that mountain with enthusiasm because I'm giving them freedom to trust them to do it their way.
Bob, a couple of things are coming up for me that I'm hearing the number one challenge right now in the workplace with information, and it's around role clarity. And I think that is the biggest issue, that when a leader thinks they've said, okay, here's what we've got to get done, and they've tried to make that clear and give it to the employee to own it, but sometimes they don't own it, or they bring the accountability back to the team. This is a common thing I'm hearing lately. How do you feel like using questions will help in that situation around role clarity and around accountability? I think the accountability we kind of answered earlier, but mainly around role clarity. So as a
Yeah.
leader, making sure they're not dictating, they're guiding, right? As a coach, leader as coach, but how do they help them have that role clarity when they're not getting that? And I would assume it's asking questions about the role, about what,
Yeah.
are you clear? Do you have what you need? But I think as leaders, taking the time to ask the questions. Is that what you're seeing? And is that what you're hearing?
Yes. Let me approach it this way. I'll ask you this question. Do you love being told what to do?
No.
No. Now, isn't it interesting? I've yet to meet a person who says, "Oh, I love being told what to do." Do you love being told what to do? None of them say, "Oh, yes." And yet, why then would you turn around and tell your staff what to do if you don't like being told what to do?
Right.
And it's I get a lot of leaders when I point that out just smiling. It's like, yeah, isn't that, yeah, an inconsistency. I don't like being told what to do, but then I tell my staff what to do.
Mm.
And as it relates to performance role clarity, I'll ask another question. Dana, whenever you've had somebody you report to ask you, Dana, what do you think we might do here about some issue, opportunity, challenge, problem? But how did it make you feel that they asked you, what do you think we ought to do here?
Oh, I think it's an amazing question to ask, because the recipient can come up with all kinds of solutions and feel like they're part of solving the problem.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
exactly. But how did it make you feel when they asked you?
Oh, valued probably
Yeah.
is probably the word that comes
You
to
know,
mind.
I mean, I point out without the leader saying, Dana, I value you. I think you have a brain. I think you're smart. I think you have wisdom. Just asking, Dana, in this situation, what would you recommend?
Mm-hmm.
Just that act communicates all of that. And you feel valued, you feel respected. And and it's kind of like, your head comes up and it's like, wow, I want to contribute. I'm invited to contribute. We want then to give what we would think would be a wise response, a good answer. We're in, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as it relates to roles and effectiveness, um, one of my favorite questions is, if we were in a situation where you're reporting to me, Dina, what can I do to help make you successful?
Mm-hmm.
What do you have everything you need? What else might you need that would help you be successful? And of course, listening then, and of course, then responding. Um, I think, asking the question from time to, you can be specific, regarding your role that you've taken on here, Dana. Is there anything that's unclear?
Mhm.
And then listening to that, is there anything that you think ought to be added to, your responsibilities in this role? Is there anything that should be deleted? It's like, yeah, I sense I'm being asked to do this, but I don't think it fits here.
Mhm.
And it's a willingness. Here's what I tell leaders. Instead of making the staff member reporting to you having to kind of figure out, how do I bring this up?
Right.
In other words, a negative thing. As a leader, ask questions that make it easy if they do
Mhm.
have a burr under the saddle, a tack that they're sitting on, easy to share that.
Mhm.
And when they respond to your question of saying, yeah, there's some things I don't think that fit, man, share them with me. And then, Dana, thank you. That's so
Mhm.
valuable. In other words, affirm and appreciate their answer
Mhm.
when they are sharing negative things, because the reality is they really are helping you. Um,
Right.
as a leader, you really do want to know the negative things, the drainers that are draining them, and sometimes, well, to me, this is fascinating. I'm going a little different direction here. Um, there's two decision-making processes I talk about. And they really have the same three boxes in this decision-making process. They're just organized differently between decision-making process one and decision-making process two. In decision-making process one, leader makes decision. Leader then, box two is calls a staff meeting and informs the staff. Box three, leader then says, are there any questions? In decision-making process two, leader calls the staff together, says, hey, we're thinking of making some changes in this area. What questions, what suggestions do you all have? What things should we make sure we look at and consider as we do that? Then box two, leader makes decision. Box three, leader informs staff. Well,
Mm.
when I share that, I always confess that what happens with decision-making process one, leader makes decision, leader informs staff, leader asks if there's any questions. The leader thinks the questions are going to be about, well, boss, how do we, questions about implementing. But instead, the questions are, well, did you think about this? Did you think about
Good point.
that? And you're now between a rock and a hard place. Do you
Mm.
cave and say, okay, we'll go back to the drawing board on this? Or no, we've made the decision. Well, I always point out, yeah, I have skin, knees, and knuckles from having done decision making process one. But what's so amazing is you can avoid all of that if you use decision making process two, where you call the
Mhm.
staff together, say, we're thinking of making some changes in this area. What input, what questions, what should we be considering? You get to hear all the things that you'd only hear in decision making process one at the end. You get to hear them up front,
Which is great.
and you'll make a better decision. But I'm sharing all of this to share this, Dana, and this is really fascinating to me. Research, not my research, but research I've read, shares that when staff are asked for input prior to a decision being made, they will actually support a decision opposite of their input.
Mm.
Like, 95% will, because they felt respected in being able to give input prior to the decision being made. Now, I point
Um,
out, don't ever do that to manipulate your staff. Like, I already know
mhm.
what I'm going to do, but I'm just going to ask up front. They'll see through that.
Yeah.
But if you're being genuine, and it's not that, you're always going to make a decision opposite, but it's just the fact that when you ask staff questions, even if you have to make a decision opposite, they feel respected that they were
They were
able to give
asked.
input prior to the decision. And so I think that relates to execution, role clarity, um, just a more excellent way to work with, well, staff, colleagues, clients, prospects, friends, family.
You have been listening to Dominate Your Day podcast. If you're ready to transform your life and workplace from the inside out, go to danawilliamsco.com and set up a discovery call. We would love to connect with you and equip you with some helpful resources. Thank you for listening today, and please take a moment to subscribe to Dominate Your Day wherever you listen.